What's up, guys, and welcome to the first Q&A in the 2020 regular season. It feels weird to say. It almost feels like it's not supposed to be happening right now, but yeah, it is. It's time. It's time for Q&A. It's time for Q&As during the regular season. It's time for the NFL regular season, so we're just going to jump into your questions this week. The first question comes from Ethan William, who says, what kind of impact do you expect to see from the linebackers as Mack and Schobert played the majority of linebacker snaps last year? Very little, if any. And I'll say that with this caveat. It wasn't like the linebackers made that huge of an impact last year. Like, people love Schobert. I understand it. People love the potential of Mack Wilson. But if you look at how that defense performed down in and down out last year, you can argue how effective they really were on a every down basis. Like, sure, Schobert made a few plays. Mack Wilson came really close to making some plays. He even made a couple plays here and there. But in between those plays were a lot of missed tackles, were a lot of blown coverages, were a lot of mistakes from that linebacking crew. So, no, you're not going to see these linebackers make a ton of plays similar to Schobert and Wilson. And yes, that's going to be a problem for this Browns defense the entire year. Like, they're going to have to figure out the whole covering multiple tight end situation and running backs out the backfield. Like, Baltimore is going to be a huge test for how this defense plans to go about defending these kind of difficult concepts that they're not built to go against. That's going to be a problem. But I'll also say this. I don't think Joe Schobert and Mack Wilson being here would have solved that problem either. So ultimately, that is what they have at linebacker. We kind of have known this since the end of the season. It is what it is at that position, honestly. It's not going to be great. And if it is great, it's going to be a massive surprise. Next question comes from Michael Zazula, who says, hey, Quincy, I hope you're doing well always. My question is, do you have any concerns about Jedrick Wills transitioning to left tackle? Also, do you think Nick Harris will become a starter in the near future? The quick answer on Nick Harris is yes. J.C. Tretter has a potential out after this year. I expect the Browns to exercise that. I think Nick Harris is going to be ready to go. The fact that they kept him on the active roster, the fact that he's been so good in camp so far, and really the Browns offense hasn't missed a beat because of J.C. Tretter being out, is a massive credit to Nick Harris. He's going to be the starting center probably as soon as next year. They have the option to keep J.C. Tretter for the next 2 years on top of this year, but I think they're probably going to make a smart cap move here and just switch out those two, because it doesn't seem like you're going to miss that much. And I think Nick Harris might even become better, especially since you have a young quarterback. So Nick Harris probably going to start next year. As far as Jedrick Wills goes, am I concerned? I'm concerned on some basic football levels, right? Because he hasn't been able to go full contact a lot. He hasn't been able to get those game reps. He hasn't seen like a ton of complex, pass rush schemes. He hasn't had to protect against those in the actual kind of game environment. So I am worried about him in that way. Baltimore is going to throw the kitchen sink at him. They're going to confuse him. Like, he's going to make some mistakes. He's going to hold. He's going to have, his rookie growing pains early on in the season. Long term, and even if you're talking about long term being the length of the entire season, I'm not worried about him. But if we're just talking about the first month of the season, yeah, he's going to have some hiccups. I would expect some hiccups. Overall, I think he's going to play well because he is a good tackle. I just think he's going to have those hiccups here and there, which are fine for a growing tackle. Like, I don't think you should expect him to be out there day one and be Joe Thomas. That's not realistic. And I don't think that's really fair to Jedrick Wills. He's not going to be Joe Thomas day one. He might never be Joe Thomas, but I think eventually at the end of the season, he should be a solid tackle. The next question comes from Tim Phillips, who says, I have heard nothing from the media and wanted to get some insight. You've watched the camps. So what have you seen from special teams in a way of kick returning and punt returning? I'll give the media some slack here. The reason you haven't heard anything about the kick returning and punt returning situation is it's not really something you can practice in this current situation, right? Because you can't really go live all you can do is practice the formation and like simulate some things. So it's going to be JoJo Natson. If that's what you were asking for, the kick returner and punt returner, it's going to be JoJo Natson. That's why he's on the team. He's only on this team to return kicks and maybe take an end around every once in a while. But that's going to be JoJo Natson, no doubt about it. Donovan Peoples-Jones might fill in here and there later on in the season, but it's going to be JoJo Natson. As far as how that whole thing's looking, I have no idea. The Browns don't even have any idea. The good thing is all this talk about coaches changing and how that's going to mess up everything for every team that has a different coach or different quarterback or whatever. And I think it's a little bit overdone, those kind of takes, and I'll get to that later. But for all the lip service those takes have gotten, I think you at least have the same special teams coordinator and you have some continuity in that area. So maybe that won't be that big of a deal, but it's going to be a problem for the entire league, quite honestly. Like nobody's been able to practice this the right way. So it's going to be a problem for everybody. This next question comes from Austin Doty, who says, what scenario do you see more likely to happen? Joe Burrow goes off and wins Rookie of the Year, or Big Ben wins Comeback Player of the Year, takes the Steelers to the playoffs? Now, y'all know what I'm going to say here. If you've been watching this channel for more than a video, y'all know what I'm going to say here. Joe Burrow is way more likely to win Rookie of the Year than Big Ben is to win Comeback Player of the Year. Now, I understand there's Browns fans who are just worried about Big Ben, and they won't, until he retires, they won't stop being afraid of him and all this and that. And I get it, whatever. People are scared. But, I'm just trying to look at this from logical, non-fan standpoint. Just look at this how I would look at it for all other 32 teams. Big Ben's 38, elbow surgery, doesn't look that likely that he's going to come back and play well, especially with the weapons that he has, or lack thereof weapons that he has in Pittsburgh this year. I don't think it's likely. It could happen. Anything could happen. Baker Mayfield could win MVP. It's very unlikely, but it could happen. So, yeah, it could happen. I don't think it's likely. I think it's much more likely that Joe Burrow wins Rookie of the Year than Big Ben does that. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But still, even if Big Ben does win Comeback Player of the Year, understand it was not likely to happen. It just did. So, yeah, I definitely would take Joe Burrow in that bet. Next question comes from Mr. Shax, who says, going into the season, what's your biggest worry for the Browns? Oh, I worry about this secondary a little bit, right? Because, we know what the linebacker is going to be. We know what the inside of the defensive line is at this point. Like, we know those holes have always existed, but those holes have been allowed to exist and under the ideal that the secondary was going to be at least decent to very good. The way they performed throughout camp has me worried. They had their good days, they had their off days, but the problem is they haven't had a lot of days where the first team can play together. Again, everybody is out at different times. It's always been mismatchy and who's going to be in, who's going to be out, who can we depend on, who's going to be the slot. They added in Ronnie Harrison at the end of camp, so now you got to work him in there. Not a lot of time for continuity and for these guys to get used to playing with each other. And again, that's hypothetical in a way, but I wouldn't worry about it if I didn't see it happen at the scrimmage, where the communication was just bad and they were getting shredded by the second team offense because they weren't in the right spots and they couldn't trust each other to be where they needed to be. Like, that was a massive problem during that scrimmage. So I worry about that because that secondary is not good. This defense, which if they have a good secondary, could be, not a great defense, but a decent defense, like, middling defense, which is fine. You can live with a middling defense. But if that secondary is not good, then that changes the situation completely and turns this defense into a really bad situation that I don't think you can afford if you play in a division like the AFC North, where teams are going to be able to score the ball like Cincinnati and like Baltimore. So I worry about that. This next question comes from Tilted, who says, Stefanski has not said whether he or Alex Van Pelt will be calling plays this year. Who do you think it'll be and why? I think it'll be Van Pelt, but it sounds like it's probably going to be Stefanski because it doesn't make sense for him to hold it out. I'm not going to get into the minutia and nitty gritty of trying to figure out who's calling the plays. Odds are we'll find out in the first quarter of this week's game who's calling the plays, because it's kind of obvious to tell who's calling the plays, and they're probably going to tell whoever's doing play-by-play. Like, it's been like this whole quest to find out who's calling the plays for this Browns offense. And my thing with calling the plays, even when it was Freddie Kitchens last year, was, look, it's only a problem until it's a problem. It's not inherently a problem to me. Just because a head coach calls plays doesn't mean that that's going to be an issue. Plenty of head coaches have called plays and they've been fine. Mike McCarthy is somebody who did better once he took play calling back from his offensive coordinator one season. So the play calling thing, like, I don't really care about it until it becomes obvious that it's an issue. You know, when it becomes obvious that Hugh Jackson can't manage the game and call plays. That's when it becomes an issue. When Freddie Kitchens is Freddie Kitchens and he's trying to call plays and he's trying to run this team and he's busy, you know, when Freddie Kitchens is calling plays, like, yeah, that's a problem. But with Kevin Stefanski, if he's calling plays, if he's not calling plays, I'm going to tend to not care about who's calling the plays until it becomes something that I have to notice. Like Kansas City has went like the last 2 years, nobody knows who calls the play. Some people think it's Andy Reid, some people think it's Eric Bieniemy. It's been a whole debate for like the last 2 years. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. They win Super Bowls. Inherently, who calls the plays doesn't matter. It just matters that the play calls are good. So if it comes out that the play calls are crap, that's when I'm going to start to worry about it. So right now, we'll see what happens, right? But that's going to be something I'm going to worry about later on the line rather than in the preseason. There's no reason to worry about that before games start, who's calling the plays, because it doesn't matter. You can't really evaluate it until games start. So once games start, I'll think about who's calling the plays. But for right now, I just don't know. And I don't care. The next question comes from Giants Nation, who says, what's up, Quincy? Football is back. My question is, who is the most overrated and underrated teams this year? My overrated teams are the Eagles and the Ravens. Ooh, wow. I wouldn't go that far. And the underrated teams are the Rams and the Giants. I did not say that about the Ravens being overrated, so people leave me alone in the comment section. I didn't say that. My overrated teams this year, obviously, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are overrated. A lot of people are going 11-5, 10-6 for that team. I think they're 8-8 at best, maybe a 9-7 if everything goes right and they get a few lucky bounces. More than likely, kind of a sub 500 team. I think they're overrated. My underrated team is actually in the division, the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of people think they're going to be like 3-13, 2-4, like that level of bad. That team's not that level of bad this year. I think they'll be a pretty good team, and they'll kind of finish in that same realm that I think Pittsburgh's going to finish in, that 8-8, 7-9 kind of realm. I think that's going to be the same realm that the Cincinnati Bengals are. I think they're actually going to finish third in this division above Pittsburgh. So underrated, overrated, I have to go Cincinnati Bengals, underrated. Pittsburgh Steelers, overrated. This next question comes from Matt Milner, who says, hey, Quincy, just wanted to ask if you are sometimes tired by the view by fans and media that this team needs to finish 8-8 to be considered progress. I don't feel like that is just because the Browns go 8-8. It's going to be disappointing, especially with what they did in this offseason. Do you feel the same way? I think what you're asking here is, do I think 8-8 should be progress for this team? Look, I've went on a lengthy rant on this on Twitter, but I'll just say this. If this team goes 8-8, nobody should be patting each other on the back. Nobody should be clapping up and like saying good job. Like if this team honestly goes 8-8, and I know all the excuses in the world, right? There was a shortened season, new head coach. All the fact of the matter is, whether people like to accept this or not, or they want to come up with different exceptions on why our situation is different, is that there are a ton of NFL teams out there that have new head coaches or new quarterbacks or new people learning new systems during this offseason. It's not an excuse for all 32 teams, because all 32 teams are dealing with it. There's going to be a team with a new head coach in the playoffs this year. There's going to be a team with a new quarterback in the playoffs this year. There's going to be a team with a similar situation to the Browns that probably overperforms what people thought of them. So no, I don't think it's going to be a valid excuse. I don't think it's a valid excuse to give this team beforehand. This team can't go 8-8 and have people think it's progress. That's mediocre. You have Odell, you have Nick Chubb, you have all these pieces on this offense that you paid big money for the next 3 years, because these next 3 years are the 3 years you're actually trying to make the playoffs and win a Super Bowl. For you to go 8-8 and potentially miss the playoffs when they added a playoff spot, that's not acceptable. That's not something I'm going to sit here and make excuses for and say, hey, the Browns should feel good about this. Like, if you're worried about them firing Stefanski, I don't think he's going to get fired after 8-8, but I think there are going to be a lot of questions being asked of the job he did if this group goes 8-8. You're running a play action heavy, run heavy offense. And people can say how new it is all they want until they're blue in the face. The fact of the matter is that half of this core ran that offense in 2018. I get why people are leaning towards, hey, I don't want to be disappointed, so I'm going to lower my expectations and be happy with 8-8. And that's fine. If you're a fan and you want to do that, that's fine. But all I'm going to say is that if we're talking objectively about this football team in reality, 8-8's terrible. You can't go 8-8 with this roster and think that's acceptable. You got to go at least 9-7, make the playoffs, and do something in the playoffs. Like, do something more than get embarrassed in the first round. Like, in order for people to feel like you did something this season or you did anything close to what you should have done with this roster. So, no, 8-8, that's pathetic. Pittsburgh went 8-8 without an offense last year. We got to expect more than 8-8 out of this team. Unless everybody on the team gets injured and they go 8-8, I refuse to give this team credit for going 8-8 this year. They have no excuse to go 8-8. They got to be better than 8-8. You know, that's just my opinion on it. Objectively, if you look at this from a football standpoint, this should not be an 8-8 team. This should at least be a 9-7 team, 10-6 team more than likely, and even better if you can get the most out of this group. But 8-8, that's not good. We shouldn't act like that's good. That's not acceptable. So no. That's it for all the questions. Thank you guys for asking. Again, guys, have a great day. Have a good night.